Tonight, I'm going to tell you about a woman who committed the ultimate betrayal. She saved the life of her people's greatest enemy, the man responsible for hundreds of deaths. And in doing so, she ignited a chain of events that nearly destroyed two kingdoms before remaking them entirely. What would you do if you found your worst enemy bleeding out in the forest? Would you walk away? Would you finish the job? Or would you risk everything, your life, your honor, your entire world, to save him? Lyra Voss made that choice, and it changed everything. Stay with me until the end of this story to discover how one act of impossible mercy in the darkness became the spark that united warring nations. And if you're watching from anywhere in the world right now, drop your city in the comments below. I want to know where this story is reaching tonight. Hit that like button because this journey is going to be intense. Let's begin. The frontier forest had 1,000 sounds at night, and Lyra Voss knew every one of them. The whisper of wind through silver birch, the distant cry of nighthawks, the soft rustle of foxes moving through undergrowth. She moved through the darkness like a ghost, her silver hair catching moonlight as she knelt beside a patch of moonbell flowers, their pale petals glowing faintly in the shadows. She worked quickly, her fingers precise as she harvested the delicate blooms and tucked them into the worn leather satchel at her hip. Moonbells only opened under the full moon, and their extract could break a fever that would otherwise kill a child. She'd learned that the hard way, 3 winters ago, when little Marcus had nearly died because she'd arrived too late with the medicine. She wouldn't be too late again. Freak. The word echoed in her memory, as fresh as the day it had first been whispered. She'd been 6 years old, standing in the pack gathering hall, with her mother's hand trembling in hers. The other children had pointed at her hair, silver white since birth, like moonlight made solid, and laughed. Moon-touched, the elders had called her, and not kindly. In a pack where strength and conformity meant survival, difference meant suspicion. Her mother had tried to protect her, had insisted the silver hair was a blessing, but when sickness took her 2 years later, Lyra was left alone with a pack that had never truly accepted her. So she'd learned to be useful instead of accepted. She'd apprenticed herself to old Margot, the pack healer, and discovered she had a gift for it. Her hands were steady. Her mind was sharp. She could look at a wound and know exactly what it needed, could smell infection before it spread, could mix compounds that eased pain and saved lives. It didn't make them love her, but it made them need her. And in the harsh world of the frontier packs, being needed was a kind of armor. She was 23 now, and she'd long since accepted her place. She lived in a small cabin at the eastern edge of Thornwood Pack territory, far enough from the main settlement that she didn't have to endure the stares and whispers, close enough that she could respond when someone came running for help. They came often enough. The frontier was unforgiving. Hunting accidents, border skirmishes with rival packs, attacks by the massive predators that prowled the deep forest. She patched them up, sent them home, and returned to her solitude. It was better this way. Safer. The forest went silent. Lyra froze, her hand hovering over the moonbells. The sudden absence of sound was like a weight pressing down on her chest. In the frontier forest, silence meant predator. It meant danger. Every creature within 100 yards had gone still, hiding, waiting. She straightened slowly, her eyes scanning the darkness. Her senses sharpened. The wind shifted, carrying a scent that made her blood run cold. Blood. Fresh blood, a lot of it. And underneath it, something else. Something that made her wolf instincts bristle and recoil. The scent of an outsider. No, worse than an outsider. Enemy. She should turn around. She should run back to the cabin, bar the door, and pretend she'd never smelled it. Whatever was out there in the darkness, bleeding and broken, it was none of her business. She'd learned long ago not to involve herself in pack politics, not to ask questions about the raids and battles that sometimes lit up the border. But her healer's instinct pulled at her like a fishhook in her chest. Something was dying out there. Something was suffering. It's probably a trap, she told herself firmly. Walk away. Her feet carried her forward. She moved through the trees like smoke, silent and cautious. The scent of blood grew stronger. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to breathe slowly, to stay calm. Panic got you killed in the frontier. The trees opened onto a rocky ravine, and she stopped at the edge, her breath catching in her throat. A man lay sprawled across the rocks below, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. Even from this distance, she could see the damage. Deep claw wounds across his chest and shoulders, dark blood pooling beneath him. His breathing was shallow and ragged, each inhale a visible struggle. But it was the mark on his arm that made her stomach drop. A black wolf encircled by thorns. The sigil of the Ironhold pack, the enemy pack. The murderers who'd been raiding Thornwood territory for 3 generations. The monsters who'd killed her mother's brother in a border ambush when Lyra was 10. The savage warriors who lived for blood and conquest, who showed no mercy and expected none in return. This man was one of them. And not just any warrior. She could see it even from here, the size of him, the quality of his torn clothing, the ceremonial marks on his exposed skin. This was someone important, someone high-ranking, someone whose death would be celebrated in Thornwood. She should climb down, slit his throat, and return home a hero. Instead, she found herself scrambling down the rocky slope, her healer's bag bouncing against her hip. "What are you doing?" her mind screamed at her. "This is insanity. This is suicide." But her hands were already moving, checking his pulse, assessing the damage. The wounds were severe, deep lacerations that had narrowly missed vital arteries, broken ribs, at least 3, possible internal bleeding. He'd been attacked by something massive, something with claws like daggers, and he'd fought back. There were defensive wounds on his arms, and the scent of his attackers still lingered on him, not animal. Wolf. He'd been attacked by his own kind. Her mind raced as her hands worked automatically, pulling bandages and wound salve from her bag. Why would Ironhold wolves turn on one of their own? Was this some kind of internal power struggle? An assassination attempt? The man's eyes opened. Lyra gasped and jerked back, her hand flying to the knife at her belt. But he didn't lunge at her. He didn't move at all. He simply looked at her with eyes the color of storm clouds, dark and turbulent and filled with pain. "You." His voice was barely a whisper, rough and broken. "Thornwood." It wasn't a question. He'd scented her pack bond, recognized her as an enemy. "Don't move," she said sharply, her healer's instinct overriding her fear. "You'll make the bleeding worse." A sound escaped him that might have been a laugh or a death rattle. "Let me bleed." "No." The word came out harder than she'd intended. She pressed a thick pad of cloth against the worst of the wounds on his chest, and he hissed in pain, his whole body going rigid. "Why?" he managed, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Why? Help me." "I don't know," she said honestly. "I should let you die. I should kill you myself. But I'm a healer. And right now, you're just a man who's dying, and I'm a woman who knows how to stop it. You'll be executed for this, probably." She worked quickly, her hands steady even as her heart raced. "But I'm used to being an outcast. What's one more sin?" She could feel him watching her as she cleaned and bandaged the wounds, as she carefully checked his ribs and wrapped them tight. He was massive up close, all muscle and scars, a warrior built for violence. There were old marks all over him, battle scars that told a story of a life lived on the edge of death. The black wolf and thorns on his arm seemed to writhe in the moonlight, and beneath it she saw something else, a crown. A small, sharp crown inked into his skin just above the pack mark. Her breath caught. You're the Alpha King. Kael Ravine, the leader of Ironhold, the man who'd personally led raids into Thornwood territory, who'd killed at least a dozen of her packmates in single combat, who was spoken of with hatred and fear around every campfire. She just saved the life of the most dangerous man in the frontier. "I'm a dead man," he corrected, his voice growing weaker. "They'll come back. Finish the job." "Who? Who attacked you?" "My own council. They found out." His eyes drifted closed. "Tried to stop me. Stop the peace." "Peace?" The word felt foreign on her tongue. "What peace?" But he was unconscious again, his breathing shallow but steady. She'd stabilized him for now, but he needed more care than she could give him here in the open. He needed shelter, safety, time to heal. She looked up at the dark forest surrounding them, suddenly aware of how exposed they were. If his attackers came back, they'd kill them both. If Thornwood scouts found them, they'd kill them both. There was nowhere safe, nowhere either of them belonged. Except her cabin was 2 miles east, deep enough in the forest that few ever ventured there. It sat in disputed territory, land claimed by both packs, but controlled by neither. It was isolated, hidden. It was madness to take him there, complete insanity. She looked down at the unconscious Alpha King, this man who should be her mortal enemy, and saw only a puzzle her healer's mind needed to solve. The wounds told a story. This wasn't a random attack. This was an assassination, carefully planned and nearly successful. Someone in Ironhold wanted him dead badly enough to ambush their own king, and he'd mentioned peace. What had he meant by that? Against every instinct of self-preservation she possessed, Lyra made her decision. She rigged a rough travois from branches and her cloak, then carefully maneuvered the unconscious man onto it. He was dead weight, and it took all her strength to move him, but she'd hauled injured wolves before. The frontier taught you to be strong or die. The journey back to her cabin took 3 hours, every minute of it torture. She had to stop frequently to rest, to check that he was still breathing, to listen for sounds of pursuit. The forest remained eerily quiet, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Dawn was breaking when she finally dragged him through her cabin door and barred it behind her. Lyra spent the next 3 days in a haze of exhaustion, tending to wounds that should have killed him. She redressed the lacerations twice daily, applied poultices that would fight infection, and carefully monitored his breathing for signs of pneumonia or collapsed lung. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes thrashing with fever dreams, sometimes lying so still she thought he'd died. She forced water between his lips, then thin broth, keeping him hydrated even when he couldn't wake fully. On the 4th day, his eyes opened and stayed open. She was at her workbench grinding herbs when she sensed his gaze. She turned slowly, carefully, keeping her movements non-threatening. His storm-gray eyes were clear now, alert and focused. "You brought me to your home," he said. It wasn't a question. "I couldn't leave you in the ravine. Your assassins might have come back. So you saved the life of your enemy and sheltered him. Do you make a habit of suicidal decisions?" "Only recently." She poured water into a cup and brought it to him, helping him sit up enough to drink. He was still weak, but the strength was returning to him. She could see it in the way he moved, in the sharpness of his gaze. This man was a survivor. He drank deeply, then studied her face. "You have silver hair. And you have eyes. Congratulations on your observation skills." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Moon-touched. That's what they call your kind in the old stories. Born under a blood moon, blessed with healing gifts. Or cursed with them, depending on who you ask. She took the empty cup from him. "My pack calls it a deformity, a sign of weakness." "Your pack is full of fools, then." He shifted against the pillows she'd arranged, wincing at the movement. "I've never met a wolf with silver hair before. I thought it was a myth. I'm very real, and very much regretting my decision to save you." "Why did you?" "Save me, I mean." His eyes held hers, demanding truth. "You knew who I was. You knew what I am." Lyra was silent for a long moment, considering the question she'd been asking herself for 4 days. "When I found you," she finally said, "you weren't an Alpha King. You weren't an enemy. You were just a man dying alone in the dark. And I'm a healer. It's what I do." "Even for someone who's killed your people?" "Even then." She met his gaze steadily. "Maybe especially then. Because if I can save even one enemy's life, maybe there's hope for something other than endless war." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. "You said, before I passed out, I mentioned peace. You said your own council tried to stop you from making peace. What did you mean?" Kyle was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he spoke, his voice low and intense. "For 3 months, I've been secretly negotiating with neutral parties, trying to find a way to end this war. Not because I'm weak or afraid, but because I've seen what it's costing us. Both our packs." "What do you mean?" "While Thornwood and Ironhold tear each other apart, the real threats are closing in. Human settlements are expanding from the south. Predator populations are growing unchecked. There are darker things moving in the deep forest, Things our ancestors fought together to contain, but were too busy killing each other to notice. Lyra felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd noticed the changes too. More human scouts along the southern borders, more attacks by mountain cats and bears, strange sounds in the deep forest that made her skin crawl. So you were traveling to negotiate, and your own people tried to kill you for it. Not my people. 3 members of my war council. Men who've grown rich and powerful on conflict. They don't want peace. They want conquest. They want Thornwood destroyed, and they were willing to eliminate me to ensure it happens. If you die, what happens? My younger brother takes the throne, and he's exactly the kind of alpha they want, hungry for glory, eager for battle, with no interest in building anything lasting. Cale's hands clenched into fists. If I don't return, Ironhold will launch a full-scale war within weeks. They'll burn Thornwood to the ground. And Thornwood will fight back, and hundreds will die. Lyra felt the weight of it settling on her shoulders. By saving this man, she'd stumbled into something far larger than herself. What were you trying to negotiate? What kind of peace? Not peace from the top down. That never works when there's this much hatred. I was trying to build cooperation from the bottom up. Neutral trading posts. Joint hunts in disputed territory. Shared defenses against predators. Small things that would show both packs were stronger together than apart. It was brilliant and completely impossible. Your war council would never allow it. That's why it had to be secret. That's why I was traveling alone, meeting with neutral wolves who could act as intermediaries. He looked at her intently. And that's why they tried to kill me, because I was getting close to making it work. Lyra turned away, her mind racing. If what he said was true, then he wasn't just an enemy alpha. He was potentially the only person in either pack who saw the bigger picture, who understood that the war was destroying them all. But he was still the enemy. Still the man who'd led raids into her territory. Still responsible for deaths she'd mourned. I don't know if I believe you, she said quietly. I don't expect you to. But I'm asking you to consider the possibility that I'm telling the truth. And to help me. She spun around. Help you? I've already committed treason by saving your life. What more could you possibly ask? Help me finish what I started. Help me build that peace. His voice was urgent, compelling. You're perfect for it. You're Thornwood, but you live on the edges. You're isolated enough that you can move freely, but connected enough that you could start spreading the message. And you're a healer. People trust healers. People don't trust me. They call me moon-touched, cursed. Then they're idiots. He tried to sit up further and gasped at the pain, his hand going to his ribs. You're the most capable wolf I've ever met. You saved the life of your mortal enemy in the middle of hostile territory. You're exactly who we need. We? There is no we. You're going to recover. I'm going to help you get back to your territory, and we're never going to see each other again. Is that what you want? To go back to your isolated cabin, patching up warriors who don't respect you while the frontier burns? His words struck deeper than she wanted to admit, because he was right. This was her chance to be part of something larger, something that mattered, to prove she wasn't just the strange, silver-haired outcast, but someone who could change the world. But it would mean betraying her pack, risking everything, possibly dying for a cause that might be nothing but pretty words from a manipulative enemy. I need to think, she said. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere. He settled back against the pillows, exhaustion catching up with him again. But think about this. You already made your choice when you saved me in that ravine. The only question now is how far you're willing to go. A week passed. Cale grew stronger each day, his incredible constitution fighting back against injuries that would have killed a normal wolf. Lyra continued her work, gathering herbs and treating him with professional detachment, while her mind wrestled with impossible choices. She'd never had someone in her space for this long, never had to share her carefully constructed solitude. It was uncomfortable and strange and not entirely unpleasant. He was intelligent, she discovered, well-read and thoughtful in a way that surprised her. He spoke several languages, could recite poetry from memory, and had a dry sense of humor that occasionally made her smile despite herself. He was also ruthlessly honest about his past. I've killed 17 Thornwood wolves in battle, he told her one evening as she changed his bandages. I remember every face, every name when I knew it. I don't pretend to be innocent. Then why should I trust anything you say about peace? Because I'm tired of remembering those faces. Because I want to build something instead of destroying. And because I've seen what leadership built on violence actually creates. More violence, endlessly, until there's nothing left but ashes. She wanted to hate him. It would be easier if she could hate him. But the more time they spent together, the more she saw him not as the monster from Pack stories, but as a man carrying the weight of impossible choices. A king trying to save his people from themselves. On the 10th day, she made her decision. If I help you, she said, I need to know the whole plan. Everything. His eyes lit up with something that looked like hope. You'll do it? I'll consider it. Talk. So he talked. He laid out a strategy that was ambitious and dangerous and just crazy enough to work. They would start small. Lyra would begin making contact with neutral traders, wolves who moved between territories without allegiance to either pack. She'd spread word of potential cooperation, plant seeds of possibility. Meanwhile, Kyle would recover and return to Ironhold, but not as the same king who'd left. He'd been given an unexpected gift. Time to think, to plan, to see his kingdom from an outsider's perspective. We'll build trust slowly, he explained, not through declarations or treaties, but through action. A Thornwood hunter and an Ironhold hunter take down a predator together. Traders establish a neutral post on the border. Healers from both packs share knowledge. Small victories that prove cooperation works. And when your war council tries to stop it, let them try. By the time they realize what's happening, it'll be too late. The connection between our packs will be too strong to break. It was idealistic, probably doomed to fail. But it was also the first spark of genuine hope Lyra had felt in years. I'm in, she said. But on one condition. Name it. If this falls apart, if it turns into a trap or a trick, I will personally make sure you regret ever meeting me. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his harsh features into something almost warm. Fair enough. I'd expect nothing less from the woman who saved my life and then threatened to end it. They shook hands, sealing an alliance that should never have existed. Enemy Alpha and outcast healer bound together by an impossible dream of peace. Neither of them knew it yet, but that handshake would shake the foundations of both kingdoms. The real work was about to begin. 2 weeks after finding Kyle in the ravine, Lyra helped him prepare for the journey back to Ironhold territory. He was healed enough to travel, though still not at full strength. It would be dangerous, but staying longer risked discovery. The night before he was set to leave, they sat outside her cabin under the stars, the fire crackling between them. Tell me about Thornwood, he said. Not the pack, the people. What are they like? She considered the question. Proud, stubborn, fiercely loyal to each other, even when they're cruel to outsiders. They value strength above everything else, which means weakness, or perceived weakness, is unforgivable. Is that why they reject you? Because of your hair? Because I'm different? Because I ask questions? Because I'd rather heal than fight? She stared into the flames. My mother used to tell me that being different was a gift, that the moon had marked me for something special. But after she died, I learned the truth. Being different just means being alone. You're not alone anymore, Sek. She looked at him, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. We're allies of convenience. That's not the same thing. Isn't it? He met her gaze, and something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps. Understanding. We're both outsiders, both trying to save people who don't want to be saved, both willing to risk everything for a chance at something better. That doesn't make us friends. No, he agreed, but it makes us something, and sometimes that's enough. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the frontier night alive with sounds around them. Finally, Kyle spoke again. When I get back to Ironhold, it's going to be dangerous. My brother will have assumed the throne. The War Council will be in full control. I'll have to take back my kingdom by force if necessary. Can you do it? I don't know, but I have to try. He turned to her. Whatever happens, don't stop the work we've started. Keep making connections. Keep building trust. Even if I fall, the seeds we plant might still grow. Don't talk like that. You're not going to fall. You don't know that. No, she admitted, but I choose to believe it anyway, because the alternative is unacceptable." He smiled at that, sad and warm and genuine. "You know what I think, Lyra Voss? I think you're the bravest person I've ever met. You saved an enemy's life for no reason other than it was right. You're willing to betray your pack for a chance at peace, and you've never once asked for anything in return. I'm not brave. I'm terrified every second of every day." Bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. "Thank you. For saving my life, for believing in this insane plan, for being willing to stand in the gap between two nations and refuse to move." His hand was warm and calloused, a warrior's hand that had dealt death but was now offering partnership. Lyra felt something shift inside her, something dangerous and unplanned. She pulled her hand back gently. "Don't thank me yet. We haven't accomplished anything. We've accomplished this. Two enemies sitting by a fire, planning a future instead of dwelling on the past. That's more than our packs have managed in 3 generations." He was right, and it terrified her how much she wanted this to work, how much she wanted to believe that the frontier could be more than endless conflict and survival. At dawn, Kyle prepared to leave. Lyra gave him supplies and detailed instructions for treating his remaining injuries. They stood at the edge of her clearing, the morning sun filtering through the trees, and neither of them seemed to know how to say goodbye. "This isn't goodbye," Kyle finally said. "This is the beginning. I'll send word through neutral traders. A red cloth tied to the old oak at the crossroads means I'm alive and making progress. Blue means danger. No cloth means don't say it. Means you're on your own and should run as far from the frontier as possible." "I'm not running. We're seeing this through." She looked up at him, this enemy who'd become an unlikely ally. "You stay alive, Alpha King. The frontier needs you." "The frontier needs us both." He held her gaze for a long moment, and she saw the weight of kingdoms in his eyes. "Watch for the red cloth, healer, and start planting those seeds." Then he was gone, disappearing into the forest like smoke, leaving her alone with a dangerous alliance and an impossible dream. Lyra stood in her clearing for a long time after he'd vanished, feeling the weight of what they'd set in motion. She'd crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. She'd saved an enemy, made an alliance with him, and agreed to work toward a peace that would be seen as treason by her own pack. She should be terrified, should be planning her escape. Instead, she felt alive for the first time in years. She returned to her cabin and began making plans. There were neutral traders she could contact, wolves who moved between territories with relative freedom. She'd start there, planting careful seeds of possibility. Nothing overt, just suggestions, questions. What if there was another way? What if cooperation could benefit everyone? It would be slow, dangerous. One wrong word could expose the whole plan. But as she worked, she found herself checking the direction Kael had gone, hoping he'd reach Ironhold safely, hoping he'd be able to reclaim his throne and continue the work they'd started, and hoping that the red cloth would appear at the crossroads, proof that she wasn't alone in this impossible fight. 3 days later, she made the journey to the old oak at the crossroads, her heart pounding. A red cloth fluttered in the breeze, bright as blood, bright as hope. He'd made it. He was alive. The alliance held. Lyra allowed herself a small smile as she turned back toward her cabin, her mind already racing with plans and possibilities. The frontier had been at war for 3 generations. The hatred ran deep, and the scars ran deeper. But she'd saved an enemy's life in the darkness, and that single act of impossible mercy had opened a door neither of them could close. Now they would see how far they could walk through it before the world tried to drag them back. The answer, she suspected, would change everything. The red cloth changed everything, and it changed nothing at all. Lyra stood in her cabin 3 weeks after Kael's departure, grinding willow bark into powder with methodical precision. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind was far away, tracing the delicate web of connections she'd begun building across the frontier. 5 traders now. 5 neutral wolves who moved between territories, carrying goods and gossip in equal measure. She'd approached each one carefully, testing the waters with seemingly innocent questions. What if there was a place where both packs could trade safely? What if hunters from both sides worked together against the predators that threatened everyone? The responses had been cautious but not hostile. Seeds planted, taking root in darkness. But progress was agonizingly slow, and the frontier was growing more dangerous by the day. A sharp knock at her door made her jump, scattering powder across the workbench. She wiped her hands quickly and reached for the knife she kept hidden beneath the table edge. "Lyra, open up! It's Marcus!" She relaxed slightly. Marcus was one of the few Thornwood wolves who didn't treat her with open contempt, mainly because she'd saved his life when he was 7, pulling him back from the brink of fever death with moonbell extract and 3 sleepless nights of care. He was 17 now, lean and eager, still too young for the deep cynicism that marked most frontier wolves. She opened the door to find him breathing hard, his face flushed with exertion. "What's wrong?" "You need to come. Now. It's my sister. She went into labor 2 days ago, and the baby won't come. Mother Greta says—" He swallowed hard. "She says to prepare for the worst. But I thought maybe you could— I'll get my supplies." Lyra was already moving, pulling together the herbs and tools she'd need. Difficult birth. 2 days of labor meant exhaustion, possible tearing, risk of infection. The baby could be breech or simply too large. Both lives hung in the balance. She followed Marcus through the forest at a run, her healer's bag bouncing against her hip. The main Thornwood settlement came into view, a cluster of sturdy cabins built into the hillside, smoke rising from multiple fires. Wolves stopped their work to stare as she passed, and she felt the weight of their gazes like physical blows. Moontouched is here. What's she doing in the settlement? Greta must be desperate to call for her. She ignored them, following Marcus to one of the larger cabins. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of blood and sweat and fear. A woman, Marcus's sister, Elena, lay on a birthing bed, her face gray with exhaustion, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Mother Greta, the pack's elder midwife, stood nearby with her arms crossed, her expression grim. "About time," Greta said sharply, "though I don't know what you think you can do that I haven't already tried." Lyra ignored the barb and moved to Elena's side, her hands already assessing. The young woman's pulse was weak and thready. Her skin was clammy. She was fading fast. "How long since the waters broke?" "Yesterday morning." "Too long. Far too long." Lyra's mind raced through possibilities, her training taking over. She gently examined Elena, and her heart sank. The baby was breech, feet first, and wedged in the birth canal. No wonder labor had stalled. "I need to turn the baby," Lyra said quietly. "It's the only way." "Turn it?" Greta's voice was sharp with disbelief. "That's impossible. You'll kill them both." "If I don't try, they'll both die anyway." Lyra looked up at the older woman, holding her gaze steadily. "I've read about the technique in the old texts. I know what to do." "Reading about something and doing it are very different things, girl." "Then watch and learn." She could feel the tension in the room, the skepticism radiating from Greta and the other women gathered there. They didn't trust her, they never had. But right now, Elena didn't have the luxury of choice. Lyra worked with agonizing care, her hands moving inside the birth canal, feeling for the baby's position. Elena screamed, a sound that tore through the cabin like a knife. But Lyra forced herself to stay focused. She found one tiny foot, then the other, and began the delicate process of manipulation. Turn the baby, rotate it, guide it back toward the correct position. Sweat dripped down her face. Her arms trembled with effort. The baby was stuck, the position all wrong, and every movement risked cord compression or internal damage to the mother. "You're killing her," someone shouted. "Get away from her, freak! Let Greta handle this." Lyra blocked out the voices, her entire world narrowing to the feel of the tiny body beneath her hands. She could sense the baby's heartbeat, fast and frightened. She could feel Elena's pulse weakening, and then, there. A shift. A rotation. The baby moved. "Push, Lyra commanded. "Elena, push now!" Elena gathered her remaining strength and bore down. The baby moved again, sliding into the correct position. Another push, and the head crowned. One more, and a baby boy slipped into Lyra's waiting hands, tiny and perfect and blessedly alive. For one horrible second, he didn't breathe. Lyra cleared his airway with swift efficiency, rubbed his tiny chest, and was rewarded with an indignant wail that filled the cabin. Around her, the gathered women gasped in shock and relief. She placed the crying infant in Elena's arms, then quickly treated the mother, stopping the bleeding, delivering the afterbirth, checking for tears. Both mother and child were going to survive. Marcus was crying openly, his hand gripping his sister's. Elena stared down at her son with wonder and exhaustion in equal measure. "You saved them," she whispered. "You saved us both." "Just doing my job." Lyra packed her supplies with shaking hands, the adrenaline draining away and leaving her hollow. She needed to get out of here, back to her cabin, before anyone decided to turn gratitude into something uglier. But as she moved toward the door, a commanding voice stopped her. "Healer, wait." Lyra turned to find Alpha Garrett standing in the doorway, his massive frame blocking the exit. He was in his 50s, broad-shouldered and graying, with eyes like chips of ice. Behind him stood 3 members of the Pack Council, all watching her with expressions she couldn't read. "Alpha," she said carefully, bowing her head in the traditional gesture of respect. "What you did today was remarkable." His voice was neutral, giving nothing away. "Greta tells me it was impossible, yet you did it anyway." The old text described the technique. I simply applied the knowledge. Knowledge? He stepped into the cabin, and the other wolves instinctively moved back, giving him space. "You're always reading those old books, aren't you? Learning things that others have forgotten." There was something in his tone that made her uneasy. "Healing requires constant learning, Alpha." "Indeed. And I wonder what else you've been learning. What else you've been doing in that isolated cabin of yours." He moved closer, and she forced herself to stand still, to meet his gaze without flinching. "You disappear into the forest for days at a time. You're seen in disputed territory, far from where you have any business being. And there are whispers that you've been meeting with neutral traders, asking strange questions." Her blood turned to ice. Someone had been watching her. Someone had talked. "I gather herbs where they grow, Alpha. Some of the rarest plants only thrive in disputed territory. And the traders? I trade for supplies I can't make myself. Bandages, surgical thread, medicines from beyond the frontier." She kept her voice steady, even as her mind raced. How much did he know? How much did he suspect? Convenient explanations. He circled her slowly, like a predator assessing prey. "But I've been Alpha for 20 years, girl. I know when someone is hiding something, and I know that the frontier is on the edge of a knife right now. One wrong move, one act of betrayal, and everything goes up in flames. I'm loyal to Thornwood, Alpha." "Are you? Or are you loyal only to yourself, living out there on the edges, belonging to no one?" He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell the wood smoke on his clothes. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to move back into the settlement. You're going to work where we can see you, and you're going to stop your little excursions into disputed territory." It was a cage disguised as an order. If she moved into the settlement, she'd be watched constantly. She'd never be able to meet with the traders, never be able to continue building the network she and Kyle had started. "Alpha, I work best in isolation. My cabin is equipped for—" That wasn't a request. His voice went hard as stone. "You've proven your value today, healer, which means you're too valuable to leave unsupervised. You move into the settlement by week's end, or you leave Thornwood territory entirely. Choose." Around her she felt the other wolves watching, waiting to see if she'd challenge him. But challenging an Alpha was suicide. He had every right to make this demand, and they both knew she had no grounds to refuse. "I understand, Alpha," she said quietly. "I'll move into the settlement." "Good. Greta will show you to your new quarters." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "And Lyra, if I find out you've been doing anything to endanger this pack, there won't be a second warning. Moon-touched or not, you'll answer for betrayal the same way anyone else would." He left, taking his council members with him, and the tension in the room slowly released like a held breath. Lyra stood frozen, her mind reeling. She was trapped, caged, under constant surveillance with no way to continue the work she and Kyle had started. The fragile network they'd been building would wither and die without her careful tending. Marcus touched her arm gently. "I'm sorry. I didn't think, calling you here, I didn't mean to expose you to. It's not your fault." She managed a weak smile. "You did the right thing. Your sister and nephew are alive because you came to get me." But as she gathered her things and prepared to leave, She felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her. The Alpha suspected something. She was being watched. One wrong move would expose not just her, but Kael's entire plan for peace. And somewhere out there, Kael was making his own dangerous moves in Ironhold, counting on her to hold up her end of the alliance. She couldn't let him down. But she also couldn't see any way forward that didn't end in disaster. The week that followed was a special kind of torture. Lyra moved into a small cabin in the settlement, barely large enough for a bed and her workbench. Wolves watched her constantly, when she worked, when she gathered herbs in the carefully monitored gardens, when she treated patients who came with injuries and illnesses. She felt eyes on her every moment, waiting for her to slip, to reveal whatever secret they were certain she was hiding. She kept her head down and her hands busy. She treated cuts and fevers and broken bones with quiet efficiency. She was polite but distant, giving them no reason to suspect, no opening to accuse. But inside, she was screaming. The red cloth still fluttered at the crossroads. She'd managed one brief, carefully supervised trip to gather medicinal bark, and had checked from a distance. Kael was alive. The alliance still held. But she had no way to continue the work, no way to reach the traders, no way to build the connections that were supposed to bridge two warring packs. On the 8th day of her captivity, opportunity came from an unexpected source. She was treating a young hunter's broken arm when she overheard two scouts talking near her cabin. Spotted an Ironhold patrol in Sector 7. How many? 4, maybe 5, moving careful like they're scouting for something. Should report to the Alpha. Could be planning a raid. Lyra's hand stilled on the bandage she was wrapping. Sector 7 was deep in disputed territory, near the old stone bridge where traders sometimes met. If Ironhold scouts were there, it could mean Kael was trying to establish one of their planned neutral meeting points. Or it could mean his enemies in Ironhold had discovered the plan and were setting a trap. She finished with her patient and sent him on his way, then stood at her window staring out at the settlement. She needed to get to Sector 7, needed to find out what was happening, but there was no possible way she could leave the settlement without being followed, questioned, or stopped. Unless her mind raced through possibilities, discarding options as quickly as she thought of them. And then she remembered something Greta had mentioned yesterday. A child in the eastern cabins had been showing signs of fever. Nothing serious yet, but it could develop into something worse. She gathered her supplies and walked purposefully to the eastern side of the settlement, where the scouts were less concentrated. She knocked on the cabin door, was admitted by a worried mother, and spent an hour treating the feverish child with careful attention. While the mother's attention was on her son, Lyra moved to the window and assessed her position. The eastern edge of the settlement backed up against dense forest. From here, she could slip into the trees and be gone before anyone noticed. It was risky, insane. If she was caught, there would be no explaining it away. But if Kael was in danger, if the fragile alliance they'd built was about to be exposed or destroyed, she had to know. She finished her treatment, gave the mother detailed instructions, and waited until the woman went to the back room to get water. Then she slipped out the side door and melted into the forest. Her heart hammered as she ran, expecting at any moment to hear shouts of alarm behind her, but the forest remained quiet. She'd done it. She was free. For now. She ran toward Sector 7, her knowledge of the forest guiding her along the fastest paths. It took 2 hours of hard travel, but finally she reached the old stone bridge, a crumbling structure that spanned a narrow gorge. Voices. She dropped low, creeping closer through the undergrowth. 3 wolves stood near the bridge. No, 4. She recognized the Ironhold markings immediately. They were armed, alert, scanning the forest as if waiting for something. Or someone. One of them turned, and Lyra's breath caught. Even from this distance, even with the changes that kingship and time had wrought, she recognized Kael. He was thinner than when she'd last seen him, harder edged, with new scars visible on his arms. But alive. Very much alive. And walking into what looked like an ambush. Because on the opposite side of the bridge, hidden in positions that Kael's group couldn't see, were 5 Thornwood warriors. She recognized their leader, Darek, one of Alpha Garrett's most loyal enforcers. They weren't here to meet, they were here to kill. Lyra's mind raced. She was alone, unarmed except for her knife and outnumbered 9-1. She had seconds to decide. Stay hidden and watch Kael walk into a trap, or reveal herself and risk both their lives. She chose the only option her conscience would allow. She stepped out of the undergrowth into the open space near the bridge, her hands raised to show she was unarmed. 9 sets of eyes snapped to her. "Lyra?" Kale's voice was sharp with shock and fear. "What are you—" "It's a trap," she shouted. "Thornwood warriors in the tree line, west side. They're waiting for you to cross." For one frozen moment, no one moved. Then everything exploded into chaos. The Thornwood warriors burst from their hiding places, realizing their ambush had been exposed. Kael's group spun to face them, weapons appearing in their hands with practiced speed. Darik's face twisted with rage as he locked eyes on Lyra. "Traitor!" he roared. "You warned them!" "Stand down!" Lyra stepped between the two groups, her voice ringing with authority she didn't feel. "Everyone stand down. This doesn't have to end in blood." "Get out of the way, Moon Touched," Darik snarled. "This is pack business. This is frontier business, and it concerns all of us." She turned to Kael, her eyes pleading. Tell them why you're really here." Kael looked at her for a long moment, and she saw him weighing impossible choices. Revealing the truth meant exposing the peace plan, risking rejection from both sides. But staying silent meant watching this escalate into violence that would doom any chance of future cooperation. He made his choice. "I'm here to negotiate," he said loudly, his voice carrying to both groups. "Not to raid, not to spy, to negotiate a peace that benefits both our packs." Darik laughed harshly. "Peace? With Ironhold? We'd sooner make peace with mountain lions." "Then you're a fool, Sog," Kael shot back. "Because while we tear each other apart, human settlements are expanding. Predator populations are exploding. There are things moving in the deep forest that should terrify every wolf on this frontier, but you're too busy nursing old grudges to see the real threats. The real threat is standing right in front of me, an Ironhold alpha and a Thornwood traitor." "I'm not a traitor," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I'm trying to save lives, all of our lives. Do you even remember why our packs are at war?" "They killed my grandfather," one of the Thornwood warriors said. "And you killed my cousin," an Ironhold wolf countered. "And they killed my brother." "They burned our northern camp." The accusations flew back and forth, 3 generations of grievances pouring out in angry shouts. Lyra listened to them all, feeling the weight of history pressing down like a physical thing. "Stop," she finally shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. "Listen to yourselves. Every single one of you can name someone you've lost. Every single one of you is here because someone else started this cycle. But none of you can tell me what you've actually gained from all this killing. What has the war won you? Safety? Prosperity? Peace of mind?" Silence fell, uncomfortable and heavy. "I'll tell you what it's won," Lyra continued, her voice softening but losing none of its intensity. "It's won you fear. It's won you a frontier that gets smaller every year while the real threats close in. It's won you a future where your children will fight the same pointless battles you're fighting now, dying for grudges they inherited but didn't earn." "Pretty words," Darik said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "But words don't change reality. Ironhold is our enemy." "That's the way it's always been. It doesn't have to be." Kael stepped forward, his posture non-threatening but his presence commanding. 3 months ago, I started asking what our packs could accomplish if we stopped fighting each other and started working together. The answer terrified my war council enough that they tried to have me killed. "Why?" one of the Thornwood warriors asked, curiosity breaking through suspicion. "Because peace is bad for business when your power depends on war." Kael's voice was bitter. "My council members have gotten rich and influential by keeping this conflict alive. They don't want it to end. They want it to escalate. And if I'm any judge of frontier politics, you have similar wolves in Thornwood who profit from your fear." Darik shifted uncomfortably, and Lyra felt a spark of hope. He knew. They all knew. Every pack had wolves who grew powerful by stoking the flames of conflict. "So what do you propose?" Darik asked slowly. "Some kind of peace treaty that falls apart the moment someone's temper flares?" "No. Treaties fail because they're built on promises instead of connections." Kael gestured to the bridge between them. "We propose cooperation, joint hunts against predators, shared defense of the frontier, trading posts where both packs can benefit. Small actions that prove we're stronger together than apart. And you think that will work?" You think generations of hatred will just disappear? No, but I think it might transform into something useful. Kale looked at each of them in turn. Rivalry doesn't have to mean war. Competition doesn't require killing. We can be separate packs with separate identities and still cooperate on matters that benefit us both. The Thornwood warriors exchanged glances, uncertainty replacing hostility. Lyra could see the shift happening, see them considering possibilities they'd never allowed themselves to imagine. But Darek wasn't convinced. And what about you? He pointed at Lyra. You saved his life, didn't you? That's why you've been sneaking around, meeting with traitors. You're in league with Ironhold. I saved a dying man, Lyra said quietly. I didn't know who he was at first. And by the time I did, I'd already chosen to help him. That choice led me here to a moment where maybe, just maybe, we can stop the cycle of violence before it kills us all. Noble sentiments from the moon-touched freak. Darek's sneer was back. But you've still committed treason. You warned our enemies of an ambush. You've been secretly collaborating with an Ironhold Alpha. Alpha Garrett will want your head for this. Then I'll face him. Lyra lifted her chin. I'm not running. I'm not hiding. I believe in what we're trying to build here, and I'll defend it before the whole pack if I have to. They'll execute you. Maybe. But at least I'll die knowing I tried to build something instead of destroying. She looked at the assembled warriors, at the mix of confusion and curiosity and lingering anger on their faces. All of you have a choice right now. You can report this meeting and watch the frontier descend into open war, or you can be part of something different, something better. And if we choose war, one of the Ironhold wolves asked, then we all lose, Kael said simply. Thornwood loses, Ironhold loses, and the frontier becomes a graveyard. The silence stretched long and tense. Lyra could see them thinking, weighing, considering options they'd never had before. This was the moment everything hung on, the moment when years of hatred could either crack or harden into something unbreakable. Finally, one of the younger Thornwood warriors spoke. I'm willing to listen, to consider cooperation, but I won't be called a traitor for it. Nor should you be, Kael said. Cooperation isn't betrayal. It's survival. Slowly, cautiously, others began nodding. Not agreement, not yet, but possibility. The first crack in the wall of hatred that had divided the frontier for generations. Darek looked at his warriors, at the shift in their expressions, and Lyra saw defeat and anger war across his face. He'd come here to kill enemies, and instead he was watching his own wolves consider alliance with them. This isn't over, he said harshly. Alpha Garrett will hear everything, and then we'll see how willing you all are to commit treason. He turned and stalked into the forest, two of his warriors following reluctantly. But the others remained, their weapons lowered, their expressions thoughtful. Lyra felt her knees go weak with relief. It wasn't victory, not even close. But it was a beginning, a fragile, dangerous beginning that could still collapse at any moment. Kael caught her eye across the bridge, and she saw gratitude and fear and determination in equal measure. They'd exposed themselves, risked everything, and gained only the barest foothold. Now came the hard part, defending their choice to wolves who would see it as betrayal, and proving that peace was worth the terrible price it would demand. The walk back to Thornwood Settlement felt like a march to execution. Lyra moved through the forest with her mind racing, knowing that Darek had at least an hour's head start and would use every minute of it to poison the Alpha's mind against her. The three Thornwood warriors who'd stayed at the bridge walked behind her, not as escorts exactly, but not as allies either. They were witnesses, carrying their own confusion and doubt back to face judgment. The sun was setting when she emerged from the tree line, painting the settlement in shades of blood and gold. A crowd had already gathered in the central clearing, and she could see Darek standing beside Alpha Garrett, speaking urgently into the older wolf's ear. Every head turned as she approached. The silence was absolute and terrible. Lyra Voss, Alpha Garrett's voice carried across the clearing like thunder. Step forward. She obeyed, walking through the crowd with her head held high, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. She would not apologize for choosing compassion over hatred. The Alpha stood on the raised platform where pack justice was dispensed, his council arrayed behind him. Greta was there, her expression unreadable. Marcus stood near the back, his face pale with worry, and everywhere she looked, she saw wolves who'd never accepted her, never trusted her, finally seeing their suspicions confirmed. Darek has brought serious accusations, Garrett said, his voice hard as granite. He says you met secretly with Ironhold's Alpha King, that you warned him of an ambush, that you've been conspiring with our enemies to undermine this pack's security. He paused, his ice chip eyes boring into her. Is this true? The clearing held its breath. Lyra could lie, could claim she'd stumbled upon the meeting by accident, that she'd simply tried to prevent bloodshed without realizing what she was doing. They might believe it, they might spare her, but lies would poison everything she and Kale were trying to build. If there was any hope of peace, it had to be built on truth, no matter how dangerous. Yes, she said clearly, it's all true. The crowd erupted, shouts of anger and betrayal crashed over her like waves. Someone threw a stone that struck her shoulder and she flinched but didn't step back. Silence! Garrett roared, and the crowd subsided into hostile muttering. He looked down at Lyra with something that might have been disappointment or might have been satisfaction. You admit to treason, to aiding our enemies, to putting this entire pack at risk. I admit to trying to save lives, Lyra said, to seeing beyond the hatred that's consumed us for generations, to believing that we're capable of something better than endless war. Better? An older warrior pushed forward, his face twisted with rage. Ironhold killed my son 2 years ago, took his head as a trophy. You call making peace with those animals better? And Thornwood killed Ironhold's people too, Lyra said quietly. The cycle goes both ways, it always has. But that doesn't mean it has to continue forever. She's moon-touched, someone shouted from the crowd. Always been wrong in the head. Should never have trusted her. Freak, traitor, execute her. The words battered against her, but she stood firm, focusing on the Alpha. He was the one who mattered. His decision would determine not just her fate, but the fate of everything she and Kyle had risked so much to create. Alpha Garrett, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. I request the right to speak, to explain my actions before this pack passes judgment. You've already admitted your guilt, Darek spat. What more is there to say? There is context. There is truth you haven't heard. She looked directly at Garrett. I invoke the old law, the right of any pack member to speak their defense before the full pack in matters of life and death. It was an ancient tradition, rarely used but never revoked. Garrett's jaw tightened, but he couldn't refuse without undermining pack law itself. You have until the moon rises, he said finally. Make your case, and pray it's compelling, because the penalty for treason is death. Lyra climbed onto the platform, her legs trembling but her voice steady as she faced the assembled pack. Hundreds of faces stared back at her, hostile, curious, afraid. These were wolves who'd never loved her, who'd called her cursed and kept her at arm's length her entire life. Now she had to convince them to trust her with their future. 3 years ago, she began, I saved the life of a child dying from fever. His name was Marcus, and he's standing in this crowd right now. I spent 3 nights awake, fighting to keep him alive, and when he finally recovered, no one thanked me. No one acknowledged what I'd done, because that's what I am to this pack, useful when you need me, invisible when you don't. She saw some wolves shift uncomfortably, but most remained stone-faced. 2 months ago, I found a man dying in the forest. He'd been ambushed by his own people, left to bleed out alone in the darkness. Every instinct told me to walk away, to let him die. But I'm a healer. It's not in me to let someone suffer when I have the power to stop it, so I saved him. You saved our enemy, someone shouted. I saved a man, she corrected, and in doing so I learned something that changes everything. Kale Draven wasn't traveling to plan a raid, he was traveling to negotiate peace, and his own war council tried to murder him to stop it. That caused a ripple of surprise through the crowd. She pressed her advantage. Why would Ironhold's war council kill their own king to prevent peace? Because peace is bad for them. They've built power and wealth on this conflict, and they don't want it to end. And I'd be willing to bet Thornwood has wolves who benefit the same way, who use fear of Ironhold to justify their own authority, who profit from keeping us locked in this endless cycle of revenge. She saw Darek's face flush with anger, saw some of the council members exchange uncomfortable glances. For 3 generations, we've fought Ironhold. We've lost fathers and mothers, brothers and sisters, children and elders. We've poured our blood and strength into this war, and what has it gained us? Are we safer? No, Human settlements press in from the south. Are we stronger? No, we're weaker every year, our best warriors dying for old grudges while new threats multiply around us. So we should just forgive them? The old warrior who'd lost his son stepped forward, his voice breaking. Pretend they didn't take our people from us? No, Lyra said gently. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to choose what comes next. Your son died fighting Ironhold. My uncle died the same way. We can honor them by continuing to kill and die, generation after generation, until there's no one left. Or we can honor them by building something better, a frontier where our children don't have to inherit our wars. Pretty words, Garrett said, his voice neutral. But Ironhold has shown us nothing but violence. Why should we believe they want peace? Because their alpha risked his life for it. Because he was willing to be killed by his own council rather than continue pointless conflict. And because today at that bridge, Ironhold warriors stood down when they could have attacked. They listened. They considered cooperation. That should mean something. It means they're weak, Darek said dismissively. Desperate. Trying to lull us into complacency before they strike. Or it means they're smart enough to see what you refuse to, that we're all running out of time. Lyra's voice rose with passion. Last winter, 3 hunters were killed by a mountain cat pack in Sector 4. 2 months ago, human scouts were seen less than 5 miles from our southern border. Every week brings new signs of threats we can't handle alone, but we could handle them together. She let that sink in, watching realization dawn on some faces. Kael, Ravine, and I have been working to build connections between our packs. Not grand alliances or treaties, but small actions that prove cooperation works. Shared hunts, trading posts, mutual defense. Things that benefit everyone and threaten no one. Except they threaten us, a council member said. They threaten our identity as Thornwood wolves, our independence. No, Lyra said firmly. They strengthen our identity by giving us something to build instead of something to destroy. Thornwood can remain Thornwood, but we don't have to be alone. The crowd was murmuring now, some in agreement, some in anger, but all of them thinking. She could feel the shift happening, feel possibility taking root in minds that had never allowed it before. And then everything fell apart. A scout burst into the clearing, breathing hard, his face pale with shock. Alpha. Ironhold force approaching from the northeast. At least 50 warriors, maybe more, armed for war. The clearing exploded into chaos. Warriors rushed for weapons. Mothers grabbed children. The fragile moment of possibility shattered like glass. You see? Darek shouted triumphantly. This was a trap all along. She kept us talking while Ironhold prepared to attack. No! Lyra felt ice flood her veins. Kael wouldn't. He was working for peace. Peace? Garrett's voice was terrible in its cold fury. Is that what you call an army marching on our territory? Lock her in the holding cell. If we survive this attack, we'll execute her for the traitor she is. 2 warriors grabbed her arms, but she struggled against them. You don't understand. If Kael's here with an army, something's gone wrong. His enemies must have taken her away. They dragged her toward the holding cells, small, reinforced structures built half underground for prisoners and dangerous wolves. She fought every step, trying to make them understand, but her words were lost in the chaos of the pack preparing for war. The cell door slammed shut, leaving her in darkness. Lyra paced the tiny space like a caged wolf, her mind racing. Kael wouldn't attack. Not after everything they'd worked for, everything they'd risked, which meant something had gone terribly wrong in Ironhold. His brother, the War Council. They must have made their move, forced his hand somehow, or taken control entirely and were using his name to launch the assault he'd been trying to prevent. She had to get out, had to stop this before both packs destroyed each other and everything they'd tried to build. The cell had no windows, just thick walls of stone and timber. The door was barred from the outside with heavy wood reinforced with iron. She'd treated enough prisoners over the years to know the cells were built to hold even the strongest wolves. But she wasn't trying to break out with strength. Her healer's bag had been taken, but they'd missed the small knife she kept strapped to her ankle inside her boot. She pulled it free and began working on the door's hinges, not trying to break them, but to carefully remove the pins that held them in place. It was delicate work in near total darkness, and every second felt like an hour. Above her, she could hear shouts and the sounds of the pack mobilizing for battle. How long until Ironhold arrived? How long until wolves, who should have been allies, started killing each other? The first hinge pin came free with a soft snick. She started on the second, her hand steady despite the urgency screaming through her veins. The sound of battle erupted overhead, war cries and the clash of weapons. She'd run out of time. The second pin came free. She shifted to the third, working faster now, careless of the blood as the knife blade bit into her fingers. The cell door shuddered with impact from outside. Someone was fighting nearby, the battle spreading through the settlement. She heard screams, pain and rage and terror mixed together. The third pin loosened. Almost there. And then she heard a voice that made her blood run cold. "Find her, the silver-haired traitor. She's the key to breaking their will." That wasn't Kael's voice. It was deeper, crueler, carrying the sharp edge of violence barely contained. His brother. It had to be. Heavy footsteps approached her cell. She had seconds. The final pin came free, and she threw her shoulder against the door. It shifted, the hinges separating, but the weight was too much for her to move alone. The footsteps stopped outside her cell. "In here," someone said. "She's in here." Lyra braced herself against the back wall, knife held ready. Not much of a weapon, but it was all she had. The door would open any second, and when it did, she'd have one chance to fight her way free. But the door didn't open. Instead, the sound of fierce combat erupted outside. Snarls and impacts, and the wet sound of blades finding flesh. Someone screamed. Someone else roared in fury. Then silence. "Lyra?" The voice was strained with pain but unmistakable. "Are you in there?" "Kael." She pressed against the damaged door, trying to see through the gaps. "Is that you?" "Stand back." She barely had time to move before the door exploded inward, torn from its frame by raw strength. Kael stood in the opening, covered in blood, some his own, most not, with his sword still drawn and his eyes blazing with fury and fear in equal measure. "Thank the stars," he said, reaching for her. "I thought they'd already—" "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "You're supposed to be building peace, not leading an assault." "I didn't lead this." His face was haggard, marked with fresh bruises and cuts. "My brother staged a coup 3 days ago. He took my counsel, declared me unfit to rule, and ordered this attack before I could stop him. I've been fighting my own warriors just to get here." The pieces fell into a horrible place. "He's trying to destroy any chance of peace." "He's succeeding." Kael gripped her shoulders. "Lyra, it's worse than you know. He didn't just bring Ironhold warriors. He made a deal with human mercenaries, promised them Thornwood land if they help eliminate your pack. This isn't a raid, it's genocide." The word hung between them like a physical weight. Above them, the sounds of battle intensified, no longer just wolf against wolf, but the sharp crack of human weapons, the screams of the dying. "We have to stop this," Lyra said. "How?" "My warriors won't listen to me. My brother convinced them I've gone soft, that I've betrayed Ironhold for a Thornwood witch. Your pack thinks I'm leading the assault, and the humans don't care about either side. They just want us all dead so they can claim the frontier." Lyra's mind raced through impossible scenarios, searching for any solution that didn't end in complete disaster. And then she saw it, a terrible, dangerous possibility that might be their only chance. "We unite them," she said, "right now. In the middle of the battle, we prove to both packs that they have a common enemy that's worse than each other. They'll never listen. They're too busy killing each other." "Then we make them listen." She met his eyes, saw her own desperate determination reflected back. "You're the rightful Alpha King of Ironhold. I'm the voice of an alternative for Thornwood. Together we stand between two armies and we force them to see the truth." "That's suicide. So is everything else." She gripped his hand, feeling the strength and desperation in it. "This is why we started this, Kael. This moment, when everything's falling apart and the frontier is on the edge of annihilation, this is when someone has to stand in the gap and refuse to move." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the weight of kingship in his eyes, the terrible burden of choosing between certain death and possible salvation. "Together?" he asked. "Together." They ran up from the holding cells into chaos made manifest. The settlement was burning. Bodies lay scattered across the ground. Thornwood, Ironhold, and human mercenaries in equal measure. Warriors fought in desperate clusters. The old enemies forced into strange alliances by the sudden appearance of a third force that wanted them all dead. Lyra saw Marcus defending a group of children, his young face twisted with determination. Saw Greta dragging wounded toward shelter. Saw Darek locked in combat with an Ironhold warrior while a human mercenary aimed a crossbow at both of them. The frontier was dying around her, consumed by the very violence she'd tried so hard to prevent. There! Kale pointed to the raised platform in the center of the settlement, the same place where Lyra had made her defense. High ground. If we can get there, both packs will be able to see and hear us. They fought their way toward it, Kael cutting through anyone who stood in their path, while Lyra stayed close behind. An Ironhold warrior recognized Kael and lunged at him, screaming accusations of betrayal. A Thornwood scout tried to put an arrow through Lyra's heart, but they reached the platform and climbed onto it, standing back to back above the carnage. "Stop!" Kael's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "All of you, stop this madness!" Some warriors hesitated, looking up in confusion. Others kept fighting, too lost in bloodlust to hear. Lyra gathered her breath and screamed with every ounce of strength in her body. "Thornwood! Ironhold! Look at what you're doing!" More heads turned. The fighting began to slow, wolves on all sides realizing that something impossible was happening. Their enemy Alpha and the Thornwood traitor standing together, demanding attention. "You're being played!" Kael shouted. "All of you! My brother made a deal with human mercenaries, promised them your land, both Thornwood and Ironhold, in exchange for helping eliminate all frontier wolves." "Lies!" The voice came from an Ironhold commander, one of Kael's brother's loyalists. "Our rightful Alpha sent us to cleanse this territory of the Thornwood plague." "Your rightful Alpha is leading you to extinction." Kael pointed toward the edges of the battle, where human mercenaries were systematically killing wounded wolves from both packs. "Look, they're not discriminating. They're killing anyone with a pack mark because to them, we're all just animals to be cleared away." Lyra saw realization dawning on some faces, the horrible understanding that they'd been manipulated into destroying each other while their real enemies prepared to claim the spoils. "Where's your brother?" Garrett's voice rang out. The Thornwood Alpha stood amid a circle of his best warriors, bloodied but unbroken. "If he's truly your enemy, where is he now?" As if summoned by the question, a new group burst into the clearing. 20 human mercenaries led by a figure that made Kael's entire body go rigid with rage. His brother. Tall and powerfully built, with Kael's features twisted into something crueler. He wore Ironhold colors but carried human weapons, the ultimate symbol of his betrayal. "There," Kael said, his voice like ice. "There's the wolf who sold his own people for the promise of power under human rule." The brother, Lyra realized she'd never even learned his name, smiled coldly. "Not power under human rule, dear brother. Partnership. These humans are reasonable. They understand that the frontier can sustain a controlled wolf population as long as we help them eliminate the uncooperative elements." "You mean as long as you help them slaughter anyone who won't submit," Lyra said. "Exactly." He seemed pleased she understood. "The frontier is changing. Humans are expanding whether we like it or not. I'm simply ensuring that some wolves survive the transition, the wolves smart enough to adapt." "By betraying everything we are?" Kael's hand tightened on his sword. "By becoming their hunting dogs? By surviving. Which is more than I can say for your pathetic peace fantasy." The brother gestured at the battlefield. "This is reality, Kael. Blood and iron and the strong consuming the weak. Your dream of cooperation was always a fairy tale. I'm just helping everyone wake up." Around them, the fighting had stopped completely. Wolves from both packs stared at this new revelation, understanding finally crystallizing into horror. The humans didn't care which pack they belonged to. The humans wanted them all gone, or broken, or enslaved. "You have a choice," Garrett said, his voice carrying to every wolf in the clearing. "All of you, Thornwood and Ironhold alike. We can keep killing each other while the humans pick off the survivors. Or we can prove the traitor wrong. We can show him that cooperation isn't a fantasy. It's our only hope of survival." "Pretty speech," the brother said, "but words won't save you now. Men, kill them all, starting with my dear brother and his silver-haired witch." The mercenaries raised their weapons, crossbows and spears and swords, human craftsmanship designed specifically to kill wolves. And then something extraordinary happened. A young Thornwood warrior, one of those who'd witnessed the meeting at the bridge, stepped forward and stood at the base of the platform, his weapon raised not toward Ironhold, but toward the humans. "I stand with the Alpha King," he said clearly, "and with the healer who tried to save us all." An Ironhold scout moved to join him, then Marcus, then Greta, limping but defiant. One by one, wolves from both packs began moving toward the platform, forming a protective circle around Kael and Lyra. Not everyone. Some remained frozen in indecision. Some slipped away into the forest, wanting no part of this impossible choice. But enough moved forward, enough stood together that the message was unmistakable. The frontier had found something stronger than hatred. "How touching," the brother said. "A last stand of fools. Men?" He never finished the order. Kael moved like lightning, leaping from the platform toward his brother with a roar that shook the clearing. They collided in a tangle of fury and violence, rolling across the blood-soaked ground. And the battle resumed, but different now. Wolves who'd been enemies moments ago fought side by side against the human mercenaries, and the Ironhold warriors still loyal to the betrayer. It was chaotic and desperate and improvised, but it was cooperation born of necessity and sealed in blood. Lyra fought too, using her knife and her knowledge of anatomy to devastating effect. A mercenary came at her with a spear and she ducked inside his guard, her blade finding the artery in his thigh. He went down screaming. Everywhere she looked, she saw proof that the impossible was happening. Thornwood and Ironhold warriors defending each other, sharing warnings, covering retreats, fighting not as enemies forced into temporary alliance, but as wolves united against a common threat. The mercenaries began to falter, realizing they'd underestimated their prey. These weren't divided packs fighting on two fronts. This was a unified force of frontier wolves doing what they did best, surviving against impossible odds. The brothers' loyalists broke and ran, seeing their cause lost. The remaining mercenaries tried to retreat in formation, but they'd ventured too deep into wolf territory. The forest swallowed them, and few emerged on the other side. In the center of the clearing, Kael and his brother still fought, a battle that had been brewing for years, maybe for their entire lives. The brother was larger, stronger, fighting with the rage of someone who'd always lived in Kael's shadow. But Kael fought with purpose, with the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders and the memory of everyone who died because of his brother's ambition. The fight ended when Kael's blade found his brother's heart. The betrayer fell, his eyes wide with shock and fury, and died without another word. Kael stood over the body, breathing hard, his sword dripping. Around him, the clearing fell silent. Both packs watched their Alpha King, waiting to see what he would do next. He looked up at Lyra, still standing on the platform, and in his eyes she saw grief and determination and hope all mixed together. "Is it over?" someone asked. "No," Kael said, his voice carrying to every wolf present. "It's just beginning." The silence that followed Kael's words felt heavier than the battle itself. Lyra descended from the platform, her legs trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline, and moved to stand beside him. Around them lay the dead, wolves and humans both, the cost of hatred made visible in blood and broken bodies. The surviving warriors from both packs stood scattered across the clearing, their weapons still drawn but no longer pointed at each other. They looked lost, like wolves who'd spent their entire lives fighting toward a destination only to arrive and find nothing there. Alpha Garrett stepped forward, his face carved with deep lines of exhaustion. Blood matted his fur and stained his clothing, but his eyes remained sharp. He looked at Kael, then at Lyra, then at the carnage surrounding them. "What happens now?" he asked, and the question held the weight of two nations. Kael wiped his blade clean and sheathed it. "Now we choose. We can return to our territories and pretend this never happened. Go back to the old hatred, the old wars, until humans or something worse finishes what we barely survived tonight. Or we can build something new from these ashes." "You killed your own brother," an Ironhold warrior said, his voice filled with something between horror and awe. "You killed your own blood for this alliance." "I killed a traitor who would have destroyed us all." Kael's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the cost of that choice. "He was my brother. I loved him once. But he chose power over pack, personal ambition over survival. That's not leadership. It's suicide wrapped in pretty lies. Darek pushed through the crowd, his armor dented and blood-stained. Lyra tensed, expecting another confrontation, but the Thornwood enforcer's expression was complex, anger mixed with grudging respect and something that might have been shame. "I've spent 20 years hating Ironhold," he said quietly. "I've killed 16 of your warriors in battle. I've celebrated every raid we survived, every victory we claimed." He looked at the dead around them. "And tonight, an Ironhold scout saved my life. Took a spear meant for me, died protecting a Thornwood wolf he should have been trying to kill." "His name was Corvin," an Ironhold warrior said. "He had 2 children, a mate. He believed in what our Alpha was trying to build." The name hung in the air between them, a bridge built from sacrifice. "How many more will die if we go back to war?" Lyra asked softly. "How many more Corvins? How many more children growing up without parents, all for grudges they didn't earn and conflicts they didn't start?" "She's right." Greta's voice surprised everyone. The old midwife moved into the center of the clearing, leaning heavily on a makeshift cane. "I've birthed half the wolves in this pack. I've watched children grow into warriors only to die in pointless skirmishes. I've held mothers as they wept for sons who fell in battles that accomplished nothing." She looked at Garrett. "Alpha, with respect, we're bleeding out. We've been bleeding out for generations. Maybe it's time to try a different way." "A different way built on what?" Garrett challenged. "Trust? We don't know how to trust them. They don't know how to trust us. 3 generations of hatred doesn't disappear because we fought together for one night." "No," Kyle agreed. "It doesn't. Trust will take time, maybe years, maybe generations. But it has to start somewhere. It has to start with wolves brave enough to take the first step, knowing they might fall." "And what does this first step look like?" a Thornwood Council member asked. Lyra felt dozens of eyes turn to her, and she realized with sudden clarity that this was the moment everything hinged on. Not the battle they'd just survived, but this, the negotiation, the careful construction of something that had never existed before. They'd proven they could fight together. Now they had to prove they could live together. "We start with the wounded," she said. "Both packs have injured warriors. I propose we establish a neutral healing station here in the settlement where wolves from both sides can be treated without fear. No weapons, no hostility, just healing." "You want to bring Ironhold warriors into our settlement?" The council member looked scandalized. "I want to show both packs that cooperation isn't theoretical. It's practical. It saves lives." Lyra gestured to the wounded scattered across the clearing. "Every minute we argue is a minute someone bleeds out. Help me set up the healing station, or get out of my way." She didn't wait for permission. She moved to the nearest wounded wolf, an Ironhold warrior with a deep gash across his chest, and began tending to him with quick, practiced efficiency. For a moment no one moved. Then Marcus appeared at her side with bandages and clean water. "Tell me what you need," he said quietly. "Willow bark for pain, needle and thread for suturing, and I need someone to organize the wounded by severity. Critical cases first, then serious, then minor." Marcus nodded and ran off. Slowly, hesitantly, other wolves began to move. A Thornwood healer Lyra vaguely knew brought her supplies. 2 Ironhold warriors carried their injured toward her. The movement spread like ripples in water, practical necessity overriding ideology. Within an hour, they'd established a makeshift field hospital in the center of the settlement. Lyra worked alongside healers from both packs, showing them techniques she'd learned from ancient texts, learning from their frontier-hardened experience. They saved wolves who would have died. They held hands of warriors who couldn't be saved, offering comfort in final moments regardless of pack allegiance. Kale and Garrett worked side by side, organizing patrols to secure the perimeter, coordinating disposal of human bodies, and establishing guard rotations that mixed warriors from both packs. It was awkward and tense, but it was cooperation. As dawn broke over the ravaged settlement, Lyra straightened from treating her latest patient and looked around at what they'd built in a single night. Thornwood and Ironhold wolves working together, eating together, some even talking quietly around fires about shared experiences in battle. It was fragile, temporary, built on adrenaline and shared trauma, but it was real. "You look terrible," Kyle said, appearing beside her with a cup of water. "You're one to talk." She accepted the water gratefully, noting the fresh bandages on his arms and the way he moved carefully, protecting broken ribs. "Did you sleep at all?" "Did you?" "Fair point." She drank deeply, the cool water soothing her raw throat. "This is going to fall apart, isn't it? As soon as the emergency is over, as soon as they remember why they're supposed to hate each other." "Maybe. Probably." He looked out at the mixed groups of wolves. "But we've proven it's possible. That's more than we had yesterday." A commotion near the eastern edge of camp drew their attention. Scouts were returning, their faces grim, and Garrett and several Thornwood warriors moved to meet them. "What is it?" Garrett demanded. "Human settlement," one of the scouts reported breathlessly. 5 miles south. At least 200 people, maybe more. They're building permanent structures, clearing forest, and they have weapons, lots of them, military grade. The news rippled through both packs like cold wind. This wasn't a temporary camp or an exploratory party. This was colonization. "They're not waiting," Lyra said, dread settling in her stomach. "The mercenaries we fought were just the advance force. The humans are moving in whether we're ready or not." Kale's jaw tightened. "How long before they reach pack territories?" "Weeks, maybe. A month if we're lucky." The scout looked between the two alphas. "And there's more. They have wolves with them. Domesticated ones, wearing collars, following human commands. Collaborators," an Ironhold warrior spat. "Wolves who've given up everything to serve humans. Or wolves who saw what we refused to see," Kael said quietly. "That human expansion is inevitable, and they're trying to survive it the only way they know how." "You can't be defending them," Darek said incredulously. "I'm not defending them. I'm saying we're running out of time for moral superiority. The frontier is changing. The question isn't whether humans will arrive, it's what kind of wolves will be when they do." Garrett ran a hand over his face, exhaustion and stress evident in every line. "This changes everything. If humans are establishing permanent settlements that close, we can't afford any conflict between our packs. We'll need every warrior, every resource, every tactical advantage we can muster." "Agreed," Kael said. "Which brings us to the hard conversation. Our packs can't survive as separate entities anymore. We need formal alliance, unified command, shared resources and territory." "You're talking about merger." A Thornwood elder stepped forward. "You're talking about erasing the line between Thornwood and Ironhold." "I'm talking about survival, about building something strong enough to face what's coming." Kael looked at Garrett. "Not conquest, not one pack absorbing the other. True partnership, both alphas leading together, both packs contributing equally, both traditions honored." "That's never been done," Garrett said. "Not in frontier history. 2 alphas, 2 packs, unified command? The logistics alone are complicated but not impossible." Lyra surprised herself by speaking up. "You've already proven you can work together. You coordinated defense tonight. You're sharing resources now. The framework is there. It just needs formalization." "And who decides how resources are distributed?" A Thornwood council member challenged. "Who gets priority when conflicts arise? Who settles disputes between pack members?" "A joint council," Kael said immediately. "Equal representation from both packs. Major decisions require majority agreement from both sides." "And when there's deadlock?" "Then the alphas decide together. If we can't agree, we keep negotiating until we can." He looked at Garrett steadily. "This only works if we're committed to making it work. If we enter it half-heartedly, looking for exits, it'll fail. But if we commit fully, knowing failure means extinction, we might build something unprecedented." Garrett was silent for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. Lyra could see the weight of the decision pressing down on him, the alpha who'd led Thornwood for 20 years, now being asked to share that leadership with a former enemy. "My father died fighting Ironhold," Garrett finally said. "My grandfather before him. I've spent my entire life leading this pack against yours, teaching our young that you were the threat they needed to fear most." He paused. "And last night, I watched my wolves fight beside yours. I watched them die protecting each other. I watched you kill your own brother to save us all." He extended his hand to Kael. "I'm an old wolf, and I'm tired of war. If you're offering genuine partnership, not domination disguised as alliance, then Thornwood accepts." Kale gripped his hand, and the gesture sent a wave of reaction through both packs. Some cheered, some looked horrified. Many simply looked stunned, unable to process how quickly their world had transformed. "We'll need a formal ceremony," Greta said, her practical voice cutting through the emotion. "Both packs need to witness the alliance, need to accept it as real and binding. Tonight," Kyle said, "under the full moon, we'll hold it on neutral ground, the old stone bridge where this started. Where Lyra chose to save an enemy instead of letting him die," Garrett added, looking at her with something that might have been respect. "Fitting." The day passed in a blur of preparation and negotiation. Lyra found herself at the center of much of it, her role evolving from outcast healer to advisor and mediator. She helped draft the terms of alliance, mediated disputes between pack members, and continued treating the wounded from both sides. She also spent time with the wolves who'd fought beside her the night before, the ones who'd been at the bridge, who'd seen the possibility of cooperation before violence forced everyone else to see it. They formed a kind of core group, wolves from both packs who'd made the choice to trust before circumstances demanded it. "You're building something," Marcus observed as they worked together organizing supplies. "Not just an alliance between alphas, but friendships between ordinary wolves." "That's what's going to make this last," Lyra said. "Treaties can be broken, but friendships, connections between individuals, those are harder to sever." "Some wolves are still angry," he warned, "especially the older ones. They're not ready to forgive or forget. They don't have to, not yet." She looked at the mixed groups of wolves working together around them. They just have to tolerate it long enough to see that cooperation benefits them. Once they experience the advantages, shared hunts meaning more food, combined defenses meaning better security, mixed knowledge meaning stronger healing, self-interest will do what moral arguments can't. That's cynical. That's practical. Idealism started this. Pragmatism will sustain it. As sunset approached, both packs began moving toward the old stone bridge. The journey took 2 hours, a long column of wolves traveling through territory that had been contested ground for generations. Now they walked it together, wary but united by necessity and the memory of shared battle. The bridge stood as it always had, ancient stone spanning a gorge carved by centuries of water flow. The full moon was rising, painting everything in silver light that made the scene feel dreamlike, unreal. Both packs assembled on opposite sides of the bridge, an ocean of wolves facing each other across the span. Kyle stood at one end with his Ironhold warriors behind him. Garrett stood at the other with Thornwood at his back. And in the center of the bridge, exactly halfway between them, stood Lyra. She hadn't planned to be there, hadn't volunteered for this visible, vulnerable position, but both alphas had insisted. She was the bridge between them, the wolf who'd started this impossible alliance by choosing compassion over hatred in the darkness. Now she stood in moonlight before two nations, feeling the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. "Tonight we make history," Garrett's voice carried across the gorge. "Tonight we end a conflict that has defined the frontier for 3 generations. Tonight we choose cooperation over conquest, survival over pride. Tonight we acknowledge that the world is changing," Kael added, "that the old ways, the endless cycle of raid and revenge, lead only to extinction. Tonight we choose something harder, something unprecedented. We choose alliance." "Some of you won't accept this easily," Garrett continued, looking at his pack. "Some of you carry scars, physical and emotional, that will never fully heal. I'm not asking you to forget what you've suffered. I'm asking you to consider what your children will suffer if we continue down this path. And some of you will call me traitor," Kael said to Ironhold. "Will say I've weakened us, compromised our strength, betrayed our identity. But I say this, strength without purpose is wasted. Identity without future is meaningless. We remain who we are, but we become something more." He walked onto the bridge from his side. Garrett walked from his. They met in the center where Lyra stood between them and faced the assembled packs together. "By the old laws and the new necessity, I, Alpha Garrett of Thornwood Pack, enter into formal alliance with Alpha Kael of Ironhold Pack," Garrett said, his voice ringing with ceremony and power. "I, Alpha Kael of Ironhold Pack, accept this alliance and pledge Ironhold's strength to our shared survival," Kael responded. They both cut their palms with ceremonial knives and clasped hands. letting their blood mingle and drip into the gorge below, a ritual as old as wolfkind, binding packs through shared life. "We are stronger together," they said in unison. The packs erupted in response, not universal cheering, but a complex mixture of celebration, acceptance, and resignation. Change had come whether they wanted it or not, sealed in blood and witnessed by the full moon. Lyra felt tears on her face and didn't try to stop them. This was what she and Kael had dreamed of in her cabin months ago, this impossible alliance, this choosing of cooperation over conflict. They'd paid for it in blood and sacrifice and the deaths of wolves who'd deserved better, but they'd done it. As the ceremony concluded and wolves from both packs began cautiously mingling on the bridge, a young Thornwood warrior approached Lyra hesitantly. "I wanted to apologize," he said quietly, "for calling you moon-touched, for treating you like a curse instead of a blessing. You don't need to—" "Yes, I do. You saw what we couldn't see. You chose courage when we chose hatred. You saved us." He bowed his head in genuine respect. "Thank you." More came after him. Not everyone. Many wolves still kept their distance, their distrust evident, but enough. Enough to show that something fundamental had shifted. The outcast healer was outcast no more. Kael found her as the crowd began to disperse, wolves from both packs setting up a shared camp near the bridge. "We did it," he said quietly. "Against all odds, against all logic, we actually did it." "We started it," Lyra corrected. "This is just the beginning. The hard part comes next, making it last, making it real, making it strong enough to face what's coming. The human settlements. And whatever else the frontier throws at us." She looked up at him, this enemy who'd become an ally, then a friend, then something she wasn't quite ready to name. "Are you scared?" "Terrified," he admitted. "I've killed my brother, allied with former enemies, and committed my pack to a course that could still end in complete disaster. Fear is my constant companion." "Mine too." She smiled slightly. "But I'm also hopeful. For the first time in years, I actually believe the frontier has a future. Thanks to you." "Thanks to us," she corrected. "You made choices just as impossible as mine. You risked just as much." "Then let's make a promise," Kael said seriously. "Whatever happens, whatever challenges we face, whatever threats emerge, whatever wolves try to tear this apart, we face it together. No more secrets, no more working alone." "Together," Lyra agreed. They shook hands, sealing a partnership that had been forged in blood and moonlight, tempered by violence and sacrifice, and built on the simple, radical choice to save a dying enemy in the darkness. Around them, the frontier stirred with new possibility. Thornwood and Ironhold wolves shared food and stories, telling each other about lives that had been spent as enemies but would now be lived as allies. Friendships formed tentatively, bridges built from curiosity and shared experience. It was messy and awkward and uncertain. It was also magnificent. As Lyra watched wolves who'd tried to kill each other days ago now laughing together around a fire, she felt the weight of months of fear and isolation lift from her shoulders. She'd been moon-touched all her life, marked as different, kept at distance, never quite belonging. Now she stood at the center of two nations, the bridge that had made alliance possible. She'd found her place by refusing to accept that hatred was destiny, by choosing compassion when violence was easier, by standing in the gap between enemies and refusing to move until they chose something better. The frontier was changing. The humans were coming. Threats multiplied in the darkness beyond their firelight, but for the first time in 3 generations, the wolves of the frontier would face those threats united. And it had all started with one woman making an impossible choice in the moonlit forest, saving an enemy's life, and in doing so, saving them all. The alliance held through the first fragile weeks, not because of grand gestures or stirring speeches, but because of small, practical necessities that forced cooperation. 3 days after the ceremony at the bridge, a massive storm swept across the frontier, collapsing shelters and flooding the temporary camps. Thornwood wolves who knew the land's drainage patterns worked alongside Ironhold engineers who understood structural reinforcement, rebuilding housing that could withstand the frontier's brutal weather. They had no choice but to work together, and in working together, they learned each other's names. A week later, a hunting party comprised of wolves from both packs brought down an elk that would have been too large for either group alone. They shared the meat equally and discovered that eating together dissolved barriers faster than diplomacy ever could. Small victories. Modest progress. But Lyra watched it all with a healer's eye for signs of infection, knowing that beneath the surface cooperation, old wounds still festered. The real test came on a cold morning 2 weeks after the alliance, when scouts brought news that made every wolf in the combined camp go silent. "Human convoy," the lead scout reported to Kyle and Garrett, who now held their councils jointly. "Moving north from the settlement, 50 soldiers, maybe more, with supply wagons and construction equipment. They're heading straight for the disputed territory, right through the heart of what used to be our battlefield." "They're claiming it," an Ironhold warrior said flatly. "Planting their flag on land we've fought over for generations." "What do we do?" a Thornwood council member asked. "Attack? Negotiate? Fall back?" The two alphas exchanged glances, and Lyra saw the weight of impossible choices reflected in both their faces. Attack the humans and prove themselves the savage threat the settlers feared. Negotiate from weakness and risk being dismissed. Fall back and abandon territory their ancestors had died defending. "We go talk to them," Kael said finally. "Talk?" Darek looked incredulous. "They're invading our territory with an armed force, and you want to talk?" "I want to understand their intentions before assuming them. And I want them to see that the frontier wolves aren't divided enemies they can play against each other anymore. We're a united force they need to respect." "They won't respect words," an old Ironhold warrior said bitterly. "Humans respect only strength." "Then we'll show them strength," Garrett said. "But strength controlled, strength with purpose." He looked around the gathered wolves. "We meet them in force, 50 wolves to match their 50 soldiers. We go armed, but peaceful. We make it clear we're willing to negotiate, but capable of defending ourselves." "And if they attack?" someone asked. "Then we defend ourselves with everything we have." Kyle's voice was hard as iron. "But we don't start the violence. We prove we're not the monsters they think we are." The delegation assembled within the hour, 25 wolves from each pack, the most disciplined warriors and the most level-headed negotiators. Lyra found herself included despite her protests. "You're coming," Kael said firmly. "The humans need to see that we have healers, families, civilization. You represent everything they think we lack." "I represent a silver-haired woman who will probably say the wrong thing and get us all killed." "You represent hope," Garrett corrected, "and we need that more than we need perfect diplomacy." They traveled south toward the disputed territory, moving in formation that was clearly military but not overtly aggressive. As they crested a ridge and looked down into the valley below, they saw the human convoy stopped in a cleared area, soldiers forming a defensive perimeter around supply wagons and what looked like surveying equipment. "They're planning to build," Lyra said quietly. "Not just pass through. They're claiming this land permanently." "Then we need to change their minds," Kael said. "Carefully." They descended into the valley with weapons visible but not drawn, maintaining enough distance to avoid appearing threatening while making their numbers clear. The human soldiers shifted nervously, crossbows and spears tracking the wolves' movement. A man stepped forward from their ranks, middle-aged, wearing better armor than the others, clearly a commander. He held up one hand in a gesture that could have meant peace or could have meant stop. "That's far enough," he called out, his voice carrying across the space between them. "State your business." Kael and Garrett moved to the front of their group. "We're the leaders of the frontier packs," Kael said, his voice calm and clear. "This is our territory you're crossing. We'd like to understand your intentions." The commander's eyes widened slightly. He'd been expecting growls and posturing, not articulate speech and diplomatic phrasing. "My name is Captain Marcus Thorne. We're representatives of the West March Colonial Authority. We've been authorized to survey and claim these lands for settlement." "Claim lands that are already inhabited," Garrett said, "by nations that have lived here for generations." "Nations?" Thorne looked skeptical. "You're packs of wolves, dangerous predators. The authority has deemed these lands suitable for human expansion, and we're here to secure them for civilization." "We are civilization," Lyra said, stepping forward before she could stop herself. Both alphas glanced at her, but neither stopped her. "We have laws, governance, healing arts, engineering, agriculture. We have families and traditions and culture. We're not animals to be cleared away. We're people defending our homeland. Thorn studied her, his expression difficult to read. The silver-haired one. We've heard stories about you. Some of my men were with the mercenary force that attacked your settlements. They say you fought like demons. We fought like people defending our lives, she corrected. Your mercenaries came to exterminate us. We had no choice but to fight back. Those mercenaries weren't authorized by the authority, Thorn said quickly. That was a rogue operation. You don't condone it, but you're here to accomplish the same goal, Kyle interrupted. Removing us from land you want. The method is different, but the result is the same. Thorn's jaw tightened. The frontier is changing. Human expansion is inevitable. We can do this cooperatively or through conflict, but either way, these lands will be claimed. Then let's discuss cooperation, Garrett said, because conflict will cost both our peoples more than either of us can afford. What do you propose? The Alphas exchanged glances, and Lyra realized with a start that they hadn't actually prepared for this. They'd been ready for violence, ready for confrontation, but not for the possibility that the humans might actually be willing to negotiate. A buffer zone, Kyle said, thinking aloud. Territory that neither of us claims exclusively, where both humans and wolves can pass freely, trade, interact. We stay out of your core settlement areas, you stay out of our pact territories, and the disputed lands in between become neutral ground. My superiors want farmland, Thorn said. Mineral rights, timber. The frontier has resources the colonies need. And we need hunting grounds, sacred sites, and territory for our young to grow. Garrett's voice was firm. We're not asking you to give up expansion entirely. We're asking you to expand in ways that don't require our extinction. And what do we gain from this arrangement? Why should the authority accept limitations when we have the military strength to take what we want? Because military strength won't help you survive the frontier, Lyra said. You've been here, what, a few weeks? You've already lost men to predators, weather, and terrain. You don't understand. We've lived here for generations. We know how to survive. We know which plants are medicinal and which are poisonous. We know when the storms are coming. We know where the real dangers hide. We can learn those things ourselves. You can try. And lose how many people in the process? How many settlers dead from eating the wrong berries? How many children taken by mountain lions because you don't recognize the warning signs? How many camps wiped out by winter because you built in flood zones? She stepped closer, her voice intense. Or you could work with us. Trade knowledge for territory. Let us teach your people how to survive here in exchange for you respecting our boundaries. Thorn was quiet for a long moment, clearly considering. Around him, his soldiers shifted uneasily, watching the wolves with a mixture of fear and curiosity. I can't make this decision alone, he finally said. I'd need to take your proposal back to the authority, get authorization for formal negotiations. Then do that, Kyle said. But understand this. The frontier wolves are united now. Both our packs stand together. If you force us to choose between extinction and war, we'll choose war. And we know this land in ways your soldiers never will. That sounds like a threat. It's a fact, but it's also a choice we'd rather not make. Garrett gestured to the wolves behind him. We've spent generations fighting each other. We're tired of war. We'd prefer to spend our strength building something lasting, but we will defend our homeland if we must. Thorn looked at the assembled wolves, their disciplined formation, their controlled strength, their clear willingness to negotiate, but also their obvious capability for violence. Lyra could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing risks and benefits. I'll take your proposal to the authority, he said finally, but I can't promise they'll accept it. There are powerful interests pushing for aggressive expansion. There are always powerful interests pushing for conflict, Kyle said dryly. It's usually more profitable than peace, but sometimes the reasonable voices prevail. We're hoping yours will be one of them. 3 weeks, Thorn said. Give me 3 weeks to travel back, present your case, and return with a response. 3 weeks, Garrett agreed. And in that time, this territory remains neutral. Your people don't advance, our people don't raid. We both maintain the peace and see if cooperation is possible. They sealed the agreement with a formal handshake. Alpha to human commander, an acknowledgement of mutual respect if not trust. As Thorn and his convoy withdrew, the wolves remained in position until the humans were out of sight. Then, Finally, the tension broke. "We did it," someone breathed. "We actually negotiated with humans." "We bought time," Kael corrected. "Whether we bought peace depends on what happens in the next 3 weeks." The wolves returned to their camp energized by the encounter. They'd proven they could stand united, present a coherent front, and negotiate from strength. But Lyra felt a nagging worry in the back of her mind. 3 weeks was a long time for things to go wrong. She was right to worry. 2 weeks into the truce, a young Thornwood warrior named Derek, not to be confused with Darek the Enforcer, went missing during a routine patrol. Search parties found his body 3 days later on the edge of human territory, killed by human weapons. The camp erupted in rage. Wolves from both packs demanded immediate retaliation, citing the murder as proof that human negotiations were worthless. "They killed him while pretending to want peace," a Thornwood warrior shouted at the emergency council. "They're playing us for fools." "We don't know who killed him," Lyra tried to reason. "It could have been rogue settlers, not the authority forces." "Does it matter? A human killed one of ours." "It matters if we want peace to have any chance," Kael said sharply. "Yes, this is a tragedy. Yes, we're all furious, but if we retaliate now, we prove that wolves can't be trusted to honor agreements. We lose any chance at negotiation." "My nephew is dead." Derek's uncle stood, his face twisted with grief and rage. "And you want me to do nothing?" "I want you to let us investigate," Garrett said quietly. "To find out who did this and why before we start a war that will kill hundreds more nephews." "How? By asking the humans nicely?" "By sending a delegation to Captain Thorne. By demanding answers and accountability." Garrett looked around the council. "If the authority authorized this killing, then yes, we respond with force. But if this was a rogue action, we demand justice through proper channels. We prove we're capable of civilization, not just violence." The argument raged for hours. Finally, a compromise was reached. A small delegation would travel to the human settlement to demand answers. If they were attacked or turned away, it would be considered an act of war. If they received cooperation, negotiations would continue. Kael, Garrett, and Lyra were chosen to lead the delegation, along with 6 warriors, 3 from each pack. They traveled south the next morning, moving cautiously through territory that felt increasingly hostile. The human settlement was larger than Lyra had imagined. Dozens of buildings, cleared fields, fortified walls. This wasn't a temporary camp. This was permanent colonization. Guards stopped them at the gate, weapons raised. But when Kael identified himself and demanded to speak with Captain Thorne, they were grudgingly admitted. Thorne met them in what appeared to be a command center, his face grave. "I heard about the incident. I'm sorry for your loss." "Sorry isn't enough," Garrett said flatly. "One of our warriors was murdered. We need to know if this was sanctioned by the authority or if someone in your settlement is acting without orders." "I've been investigating since we heard the news," Thorne said, "and I have an answer, though you won't like it." He gestured to guards who brought forward a man in chains, rough-dressed, scarred, with the look of a frontier hunter. "This is Thomas Vale. He's a bounty hunter who came to the settlement 3 days ago. Apparently there are interests back east offering payment for wolf pelts. He killed your warrior hoping to collect." "And what will you do with him?" Kael's voice was dangerously quiet. "That's the complication. Under colonial law, he'll face trial. But the penalty for killing wolves is minimal. They're still classified as dangerous animals in most legal codes. He'll likely pay a fine and be released." The wolves growled collectively, and the guards tensed. Lyra felt the situation spiraling toward violence. "That's not acceptable," Garrett said. "He murdered one of our people. In our culture, murder demands either execution or exile. I understand your laws, but I can't apply them to a human citizen without authorization from the authority." "Then get authorization," Lyra said. "You're asking us to trust in human justice." "Fine. Prove that human justice applies equally to crimes against wolves. Make this right, or prove that all your talk of cooperation was empty." Thorne looked at the bounty hunter, then at the wolves, clearly struggling with impossible choices. "I'll send word to the authority immediately. Request emergency authorization to apply frontier justice in cases involving both species, but it could take weeks for a response." "Then he stays here, under guard, until that response comes," Kael said. "And if he escapes, or is released before justice is served, the truce ends. Permanently. Agreed. Thorn extended his hand, and after a tense moment, Kyle shook it. I give you my word as an officer. This man will face real consequences for his actions. The delegation returned to camp with news of the agreement, but not everyone was satisfied. Derek's family wanted immediate vengeance. Some warriors saw the delay as weakness. The fragile alliance felt ready to shatter at any moment. Lyra found herself spending long hours mediating between angry wolves and nervous human representatives, building bridges that kept collapsing and had to be rebuilt again and again. It was exhausting work with no clear end in sight. And then, 3 weeks to the day after their first meeting, Captain Thorn returned with news. The authority had agreed to establish formal boundaries with the unified wolf packs. Buffer zones would be created, trading posts established, and most significantly, a joint council would be formed to arbitrate disputes between species and ensure both human and wolf law could coexist. It's not perfect, Thorn admitted as he presented the formal agreement to both alphas. There will be violations. There will be conflicts, but it's a framework for resolving them without war. And the bounty hunter? Garrett asked. Executed 2 days ago, under joint human-wolf authority. The first case decided by the new council system. Thorn's expression was somber. His death doesn't bring your warrior back, but it proves that justice can apply equally to both our peoples. The wolves received the news with mixed reactions: satisfaction that justice had been served, grief that it came too late for Derek, and cautious hope that maybe, just maybe, real cooperation was possible. That night, both packs gathered for a ceremony marking the formal acceptance of the human treaty. It was smaller than the alliance ceremony, less dramatic, but in some ways more significant. This wasn't wolves uniting against a common threat. This was wolves choosing to build a future that included peaceful coexistence with the very species that threatened their existence. Lyra stood at the edge of the gathering, watching wolves celebrate this impossible achievement, and felt someone approach from behind. Quite a journey from that night in the ravine, Kyle said quietly. I saved one dying man, she said. I never imagined it would lead to this. You did more than save one man. You proved that mercy could be strength, that compassion could be strategy. Everything else followed from that choice. We still have so far to go. The humans will keep expanding. There will be more conflicts, more Dereks, more wolves who feel betrayed by compromise. Yes, he agreed. But we've built something that can weather those storms. Not perfectly, but adequately. We've proven that wolves can be more than warriors locked in endless conflict. We can be builders, negotiators, partners. He took her hand, and she didn't pull away. Lyra, I need to tell you something. When my brother tried to kill me, when I was lying in that ravine, certain I was going to die, my last thought was regret. Regret for all the things I'd never accomplished, all the ways I'd failed my pack. And then you appeared, this silver-haired stranger who had every reason to let me die but chose to save me anyway. And everything changed. Kale, let me finish. These past months, working alongside you, building this alliance, I've come to understand something. You're not just the bridge between our packs. He paused, searching for words. You're the best part of what we're trying to create. The compassion and wisdom and courage that makes all of this possible. And I love you for it. Lyra felt tears on her face for the second time in weeks. I'm still moon-touched, still the strange outcast who doesn't quite fit anywhere. You fit here. With me. With this impossible dream we've built together. He reached up to touch her silver hair, the mark that had made her an outsider her entire life. You're not cursed, Lyra. You never were. You were marked for this. To be the bridge that united enemies. The healer who mended not just bodies, but nations. She kissed him then, there in front of both packs and the human representatives, a declaration that transcended pack boundaries and species differences. Some wolves cheered, some looked scandalized, most simply smiled, recognizing that this strange partnership between enemy alpha and outcast healer was the embodiment of everything they'd fought to create. When they finally pulled apart, Garrett was approaching with Greta beside him. The council has made a decision, Garrett announced to the gathered wolves. Effective immediately, we're establishing a new position in our unified pack structure. Ambassador of Healing and Diplomacy. Someone who will work between all our peoples, wolf and human. Thornwood, and Ironhold, to maintain the peace we've built and treat the wounds, physical and emotional, that remain. He looked directly at Lyra. We'd like to offer that position to you, if you'll accept it. Lyra looked around at the faces watching her. Wolves who'd once called her cursed and humans who'd once seen her as nothing but an animal. They were offering her not just acceptance, but a role at the very center of everything they'd built. I accept, she said clearly. On one condition. I get to train others. I want healers from both packs learning together, building connections through shared knowledge. The Alliance needs to live in individual friendships, not just treaties. Agreed, Kale said immediately. Over the following months, the frontier transformed. Not overnight, not easily, but steadily. Lyra established healing schools where wolves from both packs learned together. Trading posts sprang up along the buffer zones. Joint patrols became routine. Human settlers and wolves learned to coexist, each teaching the other how to survive in this harsh land. There were setbacks. A young Ironhold warrior attacked a human farmer in a dispute over hunting grounds and had to face joint justice. A group of human miners tried to establish operations in protected wolf territory and had to be forcibly removed. Each crisis tested the Alliance, but each time the framework they'd built proved strong enough to weather the storm. Lyra and Kael's relationship became a symbol of the Alliance itself, the impossible partnership that nonetheless worked. They were formally bonded in a ceremony that honored both Thornwood and Ironhold traditions, witnessed by wolves and humans alike. A year after that night in the ravine, Lyra stood on the old stone bridge, watching the sunset paint the frontier in shades of gold and crimson. Her healing school was thriving. The buffer zones were peaceful. Wolves and humans who'd once been mortal enemies now traded stories and goods at the shared markets. Marcus approached, now a full warrior serving on the Joint Council. Ambassador Lyra, there's a situation in the northern sector. A human child wandered into wolf territory and is lost. Both our people are searching, but we could use someone who speaks both languages. I'll head there immediately. She turned to go, then paused. Marcus, do you remember the night you came to get me for your sister? When you triggered the sequence of events that led to all this? Every day. I used to think it was my fault, that I exposed you to danger by calling you to the settlement. It wasn't your fault. It was fate, or choice. Or maybe just the frontier showing us what we were capable of when we stopped fighting and started building. She headed north toward the crisis, toward the work that never ended, and felt something she'd never experienced in her isolated cabin years ago. She felt like she belonged. The moon rose over the frontier, full and bright, painting everything in silver light. The same moonlight that had illuminated a dying enemy in a ravine. The same silver that marked her hair and had once made her a symbol of curse. Now that silver was a symbol of hope, of bridges built between impossible divides, of one woman who'd looked at a fallen enemy and chosen mercy instead of hatred, and in doing so, had changed the fate of nations. The frontier would face new challenges. Human expansion would continue. Other threats would emerge from the deep forest. The work of peace was never finished, never simple, never without cost. But they would face it together. Thornwood and Ironhold, wolves and humans, united by the simple truth that compassion could be stronger than hatred, and that sometimes the most courageous act was choosing to save a life rather than take one. Lyra Voss, once the moon-touched outcast, now walked the frontier as the bridge between worlds. And everywhere she went, she carried the message that had transformed everything. We are stronger together.